External accountability has a genuine upside. It provides structure when a person lacks it. It creates pressure when internal motivation is absent. It offers social support, clear deadlines, and measurable progress visible to someone else. For a person who has never exercised consistently, a coach, a challenge, or a public commitment can be the difference between starting and not starting. That is real. It's worth acknowledging. The problem is not that external accountability works. The problem is what it works on. And understanding the difference between compliance and ownership is the difference between using accountability as a tool and being trapped by it. Hey there, it's me, Cor, and you're listening to Exercising Consistency, from Fitness to Flourishing. This is the second of 3 episodes on accountability. In yesterday's episode, we looked at the mechanism itself, what accountability is, why it works, and the limits built into it. Today we examined both sides of the coin. The pros are real. The cons are deeper than most people realize. And the compliance trap is the mechanism by which external accountability undermines the very thing it's meant to build. The case for accountability. External accountability helps people start. A person who has never built a consistent practice often lacks the internal structure to begin. The coach provides the schedule. The check-in creates the deadline. The group generates the social pressure. For someone in this position, the external structure is not a crutch. It's a doorway. The accountability apparatus also provides clear feedback. Progress is tracked by someone else. The numbers are recorded. The trajectory is visible. For a person who has never had an objective view of their own behavior, this can be illuminating. The accountability mirror, reflecting actual behavior back against stated intentions, can reveal patterns the person could not see on their own. And for people whose personality type or life circumstances make external expectations more effective than internal ones, accountability can be a legitimate strategy. There is nothing wrong with using the tools that work for your situation. The question is what happens when the tools are removed. The over-justification effect. The first and most subtle cost of external accountability is the over-justification effect. When a person receives an external reward or oversight for an activity they might otherwise do for its own sake, the brain recalibrates. The intrinsic interest is quietly overwritten. The reason for the behavior shifts from, I do this because it matters to me, to, I do this because someone is watching. The shift is subtle. The person does not feel it happening. They continue to perform. The behavior looks identical from the outside, but the internal relationship has changed. The activity is now associated with the external structure rather than the internal value. When the structure disappears, the association disappears with it. The person does not simply lose the accountability. They lose any genuine connection to the activity itself. This is the scaffolding collapse. The behavior crumbles because the motivation was never internalized. It was attached to the witness, an external impetus for action, and the witness is gone. Fragile compliance and the box-checking mentality. The second cost is fragile compliance. The person performs to satisfy the coach or the system rather than to fulfill their own desire. The focus shifts from deep, quality engagement to doing the bare minimum required to pass the check-in. The box is checked. The task is done. But the person has not changed. The behavior has not become part of them. This is the difference between compliance and ownership. Compliance looks like purposeful action. The person shows up, they complete the workout, they hit the number, but the action is performed for an external audience. When the audience is absent, the action becomes optional. It's not tied to any intrinsic motivation. Ownership looks different. The person shows up because the behavior is part of who they are. The audience is irrelevant. The standard is internal. The compliance trap is this: external accountability can produce the appearance of change without producing the reality of it. The person looks consistent while the coach is watching. They appear to have built the habit, but the habit was built on scaffolding, not foundation. The moment the scaffolding is removed, the structure reveals it won't stand on its own. The psychology of internalization. Self-determination theory maps the progression from external regulation to integrated ownership. The spectrum moves through 4 stages. 1. External regulation. Doing it for a reward or to avoid a punishment. 2. Introjected regulation. Doing it out of guilt or shame. 3. Identified regulation. Doing it because the behavior aligns with personal values. And finally, 4. Integrated regulation. Doing it because the behavior is part of who they are. Most accountability structures operate at the first stage. They leverage external rewards, deadlines, and social pressure. That is not inherently wrong. The first stage is where many people need to begin. The problem is when the structure never progresses beyond it. The coach who keeps the client dependent on check-ins. The challenge that always requires a new round. The system that perpetually relies on external pressure. These are structures that produce compliance indefinitely without ever building the internal standard. The goal is not to keep the person dependent on accountability. The goal is to help the person become self-accountable. And that requires a deliberate transition. The scaffolding must fade. The external witness must step back, and the client must eventually practice being their own witness. The deeper cost. The deepest cost of chronic external accountability is that it weakens the internal system. When you outsource the function of keeping yourself honest to a third party, the muscle of honest self-assessment goes unpracticed. The skill of returning to the standard without a witness does not develop. You become dependent on the very thing that should be temporary scaffolding. This brings us back to the foundation from yesterday. The external structure of accountability best supports an existing standard. It must not suggest or provide a predetermined standard in the absence of one. Self-authoring is non-negotiable. Healthy adults must define their own standard of excellence first. You cannot hold someone accountable to a standard they did not explicitly choose. The person who seeks accountability without having done the work of defining their own standard is outsourcing not just the oversight, but the value system itself. And a value system that comes from outside will always be vulnerable to the collapse of the external structure that supports it. The transition ahead. The answer is not to reject accountability. The answer is to move through it. The progression from dependence to independence to interdependence is the path. In the next episode, we arrive at the healthiest approach, interdependence, where self-directed standards are the foundation. External support is used by choice rather than by necessity, and the witness is a resource, not a requirement. The compliance trap is real, but it is not the final destination. It's a stage to pass through on the way to something far more stable. When you are ready to build the internal standard that makes external scaffolding optional, start your day one inside the ACT Score Challenge. That's it for today. Catch you next time.